Welcome to episode 31 of Pulsive Physiology. I'm your host, Dr. Jim Davis, and today we'll explore whole muscle contraction, expanding on our discussion that we had previously of skeletal muscle contraction at the cellular level. This episode will cover the types of muscle contractions, the length-tension relationship, and the force-velocity relationship, all essential for understanding how muscles function in the real world movements. So let's break down how muscles generate force and movement. Now, muscle contraction can occur in different ways depending on whether movement is produced and how force is generated. The two primary types of contractions are isometric and isotonic. Isometric contraction occurs when a muscle contracts without changing length, meaning no movement occurs. This happens when the force produced by actin-myosin cross-bridges does not exceed the load. Now, we can break this down into two types. So you've got a maximal isometric contraction. So this occurs when attempting to lift a weight that is too heavy. So, for example, if you're attempting a maximal bench press, but you're not moving the bar. Then there are submaximal isometric contractions. This happens when muscles contract to maintain a position, such as postural muscles stabilizing the body. Then we have isotonic contraction. Isotonic contractions occur when the muscle changes length while maintaining constant tension. This occurs in two forms: concentric and eccentric. During concentric contractions, the muscle shortens as it produces force overcoming a load. This happens when moving against gravity, such as during an upward phase of a bicep curl, also known as elbow flexion. During an eccentric contraction, the muscle lengthens while still producing force, usually controlling movement with gravity. This occurs when lowering a weight in a controlled manner or walking downhill. Eccentric contractions generate the greatest force, but can also lead to muscle soreness due to increased stress on muscle fibers. Muscle fibers produce different amounts of force depending on their initial length before contraction. The length-tension relationship describes how sarcomere length affects force generation. And at its basic, it comes back to cross bridges, which we've mentioned several times in class. So when we are at our optimal muscle length, this is when actin and myosin filaments overlap just enough, allowing for maximum cross-bridge formation, which allows for the strongest contraction. Now, if your muscle is overly stretched, meaning it's very long, if the sarcomeres are stretched too far, very few cross-bridges can form, resulting in decreased force production. On the other hand, you can have an overly shortened muscle. So if the sarcomere is too compressed, myosin filaments run into the Z-discs, which limits further contraction. Now, the ability of a muscle to generate force also depends on the speed of contraction. The force-velocity relationship explains how velocity affects force production. When moving a light load, velocity is high, but force production is low because fewer cross-bridges can form. When moving a heavy load slowly, velocity is low, but force production is high because more cross-bridges can be engaged simultaneously. In maximal isometric contractions, velocity is zero, but force is at its maximum. And so just like I said a moment ago, it all comes back to cross bridges. So ultimately, what determines force production? Well, this is dependent on several key factors. Let's talk about four of them briefly. First, the number of myosin heads bound to actin. More cross bridges equal more force. I'm sorry if I'm starting to sound like a broken record. Sarcomere length. The length-tension relationship determines how much force can be generated at different muscle lengths. Why? Because it affects how many cross-bridges are formed. Next, we have motor unit recruitment. Larger motor units are recruited as force demands increase, which enhances contraction strength. And then finally, speed of contraction. As seen in the force-velocity relationship, slower contractions produce greater force because more cross-bridges can form. Now, understanding these principles helps in training, rehabilitation, and performance enhancement. So with strength training, incorporating eccentric exercises, such as a slow, controlled lowering of weights, can improve muscle strength and resilience. This can also help with the energy prevention. Eccentric contractions place high stress on muscles and should be progressed carefully to avoid overuse injuries. During athletic performance, sprinting and explosive movements rely on optimizing the force-velocity relationship for maximal power output. So to summarize, isometric contractions occur when the muscle generates force without changing length. Isotonic contractions involve movement and include concentric or shortening and eccentric or lengthening contractions. The length-tension relationship describes how sarcomere length affects force production with an optimal overlap producing the greatest force. The force-velocity relationship explains why force decreases as contraction speed increases and vice versa. Maximizing force production depends on sarcomere length, motor unit recruitment, and contraction velocity. And so that's it for episode 31 of The Pulse of Physiology. I hope this episode has provided a clear understanding of whole muscle contraction and its biomechanical principles. Join me next time for episode 30, where we transition from the muscular system and begin our journey into the cardiovascular system, starting with functions. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and stay curious.